Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part one of my December wrap-up. So this is going to be in two parts. I actually had quite a few books that I read in December, but a lot of those are already up in my, I keep calling them reading logs. It's basically a wrap-up, but it was part of an ongoing series of collabs that I have really been enjoying being a part of, so I will link that below. Tons of fantastic middle grade books there, so please check that out. Essentially, it's just like watching a wrap-up of mine. So let's get into the official December wrap-up. As always, content warnings will be listed down below, as well as links, channels, etc. that I mention. Okay, so the first book that I finished in December was Shatterglass by Tamora Pierce. This is the fourth and final book in the Circle Opens Quartet, which is the sequel series to the Circle of Magic books, and this was our final book for now in our read-along that we were doing. I was so happy to be a guest on that. That was hosted by Beautifully Bookish Bethany. You guys know I have been loving both of these series so much. This one is no different. You're following Triss as our main character in this one, and as with the other books in this series, she's sort of being, I don't want to say forced, but like kind of. She's being like confronted with having to be a teacher for somebody else. And in this case, it's somebody who is older than her. And I feel like that kind of, that friction, that conflict was handled very well. And it was really interesting seeing Triss be an instructor when she doesn't always feel qualified to be. And this one, like the other ones in the series, there's also a really interesting mystery here. And once again, the themes in these books, I think, are just really well explored. Like in this one, the bodies that are turning up are of like performers. They're basically viewed as like in the class of like courtesans, essentially. And so not a lot of people care that they're being murdered. And I feel like the way the book deals with that is really smart and really compassionate. As always, like the world building is super interesting. I like the magic. I love Triss. Like, I just love the way Tamora Pierce writes main characters. I think I even said in my Goodreads review for this one that like every time I read one of these books, I get a new favorite character. Like I love all of them. So this was obviously 5 stars as well. I will link the live show where we discussed the book. Next, I finished Lone Women by Victor LaValle. This is a horror book that is also historical fiction, and I actually listened to this on audio. The narrator was Jonice Abbott Pratt, and I thought she did a really excellent job. I really liked the audio for this one, actually, and I think it was a good move for me to listen to the audio personally because there were some things about like the setting or the plot that I think having them read to me kept me more engaged. But anyway, so we are following our main character, whose name I cannot remember right now. I will put it in captions, but she is leaving her house after burning the bodies of her parents, and that's like all we really know about what happened. And she takes this incredibly heavy trunk with her, and she has to keep it locked at all times because if it is opened, people tend to disappear. And so she ends up moving to, I think, Montana. She ends up like staking a claim or trying to prove up on a claim because Lone Women, that like Montana and that territory was one of the places that in the US you could be a single woman by yourself or like a widowed woman, and you would be able to own your own land. And that was like a fairly unusual thing for this time period. And we see her kind of trying to settle into this community and starting to connect with some of the other people on these different claims and on these different settlements. We do see some growing like friendships here. There was like one particular friendship that I really, really loved. And you can probably tell by the title, like Lone Women. A lot of this book is about like what it's like to be a woman, specifically a woman of color. Our main character is a Black woman, and also the kind of like solidarity and friendship that you can find between women. So you guys know I love that. So that was great. Yeah, I really liked this. I think it wasn't a favorite for me like it is for other people. I think one of the reasons is, so like I kind of figured out like most of what was going on, and that necessarily wasn't a problem by itself, but I do feel like, I don't know, I feel like the like uncertainty and like that tension should have maybe gone on longer, if that makes sense. But that wasn't like a huge deal. I think honestly the main, I guess, issue you could say, this is just like not a kind of setting or story setup that is going to be super for me. I don't like pioneer stories or like survival stories, and there wasn't like a huge amount of that, but there was definitely more of that than I was hoping, which is obviously very personal preference. I did like the characters. I do really love what this book is doing thematically. I love the author's note where Victor LaValle talks about that. I just thought that was very cool. So I gave Lone Women 4 stars. Next, I finished a reread of The Blue Castle by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This was a selection for our Past It Classics book club. I will link that below. Me and Taylor and Julia had a wonderful time talking about this, and And this was, like I said, this is a reread. I don't even know how many times I've reread this book. This is like one of my favorite comfort food rereads. I really love it. It's gotten me through some hard times. And so I've said multiple times before and during the discussion of this book that, like, as much as it is possible to be objective about a book, this is like not, this is definitely not one of the ones that I can be more objective about. But we are following our main character, Valency Sterling, who is, I think, like in her late 20s, early 30s. She's basically considered, you know, a spinster. All her best days are behind her, and everybody makes sure she knows that. And she ends up getting some medical news at the beginning of the book that she has a very dangerous heart condition and that she's going to be lucky to live another year. And strangely, that is kind of the best news that she could have been given, because all of a sudden she decides, like, well, now I can start living for myself. And so she stands up for herself, to her family, to their, like, connections and friends. She doesn't do things that she doesn't want to. She doesn't let people talk down to her. Like, it's so satisfying. Like, the first chunk of this book where she is, like, just finally telling everybody what she thinks of them, it is so satisfying, partly because she is not going out of her way to be rude. She's just, like, being honest and, like, respecting herself for the first time in her life. And we talked about during the live show that one of the things that we all kind of thought this book reminded us of is Persuasion by Jane Austen, because it is kind of similarly about a very quiet and reserved woman who is, like, blooming and finally getting to, like, find love of many different kinds, not just romantic love, and she's finally surrounded by people who, like, appreciate her, and it is just so lovely to see Valency experience that. And speaking of the romance, I did really, really love it. Like, the like conflict at the end is ridiculous, and, like, there are things about, like, that final sort of, like, scene that I think were unnecessary or could have been done better, but I don't even care that much. Like, I just love these characters. I love this story. I also think there are some really beautiful, like, poignant moments. Like, actually, one of the big things that Valency does is that she goes off to care for and nurse, or basically, like, keep company with this young woman who is dying of consumption, who is basically viewed by their community as being no good because she had a child out of wedlock. And I feel like the way that the book and Valency thinks and talks about this character is so compassionate and so loving, and surprisingly, I think progressive for the era. And their friendship is really, really beautiful. There's also some really great humor throughout this book, even though there are those, like, you know, emotional or heartfelt moments. I adore Valency as a main character. Like, she is very, like, quiet and determined and strong, but she also has this, like, spark, you know, like, we see her, like, finally getting to sort of show these other parts of herself that she doesn't feel like she gets to very often. And of course, being Ella Montgomery, there are some really beautiful nature descriptions throughout as well. And I also really love kind of the themes that this book is handling, and, like, the way it looks at, like, life and love and happiness. And, like, the premise doesn't make it sound like it would be a really, like, heartwarming book, but, like, I promise it is. It's just really, really beautiful. And one of the things that I think is really impressive about this is that Valency is, as a character, she is allowed to have it both ways. Like, she is, like, you know, going off on her own, and she is, like, making her own money, which is, like, very shocking. She's making her own decisions. She has a lot of agency as a character, and also she can have, like, a great love story if that's what she wants, which she does. She does want that kind of love. And I just think that's very cool that, like, in a book that is this old, especially, that she is, like, allowed by the story to, like, have both of these things. Like, even in books, like, written today, like, more modern ones, I think sometimes, like, authors don't always balance those things. It can kind of feel like one or the other, like, oh, you're being a bad feminist if you, like, want to live happily ever after with somebody, and the Blue Castle doesn't do that. So 5 stars. Is it objective? Absolutely not, but I really love this book. Next, I finished A Timeless Christmas by Alexis Stanton. As you can see, this is a Hallmark romance, which I am not, like, a big Hallmark person, but this was a fun, cozy little buddy read that I did with my friends Julia and Mary Margaret. I will link them both below. It says, an enchanting time travel romance. So basically, this is a time slip romance. We are following Megan, who is a historian, and she, like, works at a what would you call it? It's, like, sort of like a museum that's, like, in what used to be somebody's house, and she gives tours there, and she really loves like the past, and she like really loves the history of this house and of like her specific community. And then our male lead is Charles, who is from that past. He is like the previous owner of the house that like Megan now works at as like a reenactor or like historian, and so he gets brought to the future for him, to Megan's time, and of course they fall in love, but that's very complicated. So you guys know that the time slip romance thing is one of my favorite tropes. Like, I love it. I really love it. So I was very excited for this book, and unfortunately I did not have a great time. I think Julie and Mary Margaret enjoyed it a little more than I did. I was just really underwhelmed by it, and like I said, I'm not like really a Hallmark person, but I don't mean to be disparaging about like stories that are a little more on like the cheesy side, because I can definitely enjoy like books or movies that have that kind of element to it. There's one coming up in a little bit that has a different kind of like over sweetness, but it like really worked for me. So it's not that I think I'm like better than these kinds of stories. I just think that specifically this book's way of doing it really did not vibe with me. I do think I will like this more as a movie. I still need to watch the movie, and I think I'm gonna like that more, but like I just there was so much like silliness in this book. Like, it was trying to be like a great love story, and I just don't think, like, the characters were so flat, the romance was so flat. I do think there were some like kind of interesting ideas here, but like this is one of my favorite tropes, and so maybe that made me extra picky, but I just feel like it did not deliver on the like absolute prime drama that this premise could have provided. I just like the two leads were absolutely lifeless to me. Like, they had no personality except what the book like reminded you of, like their 2.5 personality traits every other page. I don't think they had any chemistry with each other. Like, I did not care about them being together. And there were also just like so many moments throughout this book that I think were supposed to be like charming and fun, and I just thought they were like ridiculous, like to the point of like secondhand embarrassment. Like, at one point they like have this like romantic, it's supposed to be this like romantic scene where they're like hula hooping and it was so bizarre. And it's like, not that that kind of like silliness can't be charming and romantic, because it can be, but like this just was not that for me. Oh, I also did listen to this on audio. I will put the narrator in captions, but like I thought the audio was fine. Yeah, I will say I do respect Charles for being so petty that like even when he's realizing that he's like falling for Megan and like, oh, maybe he should stay in the present, like the reason that he's like hesitating is like absolutely just pure spite, and I respect that. Like, I honestly, I think that it would take a pretty dramatic true love situation for me to get over the things that he has to get over. So I get it, Charles. Yeah, but overall, just like, it did not deliver on the premise for me. Very bland, very cheesy, just completely flat characters and romance. So I gave A Timeless Christmas 2.5 stars. Next, I finished The Girl with the Dragon Heart by Stephanie Burgess. This is the second book in the Dragon with the Chocolate Heart series, but these are companion books. So we are following Silk, or Silka, who is a friend of the main character of the first book. And this is a very different story. She is asked by the crown princess of her kingdom to spy on these like visiting royals, because like the princess doesn't really trust that they're actually here for the reasons that they say they are, and this is like Silka's chance to kind of like make a name for herself and to prove to her brother that she can be responsible and that she can do these things. And that also is extra complicated because their parents have actually been missing. Like, everybody basically thinks that they're dead at this point, and so her older brother is kind of having to like take care of them, or take care of the both of them, and he and Silka don't really get along anymore. So unfortunately I did not like this as much as the first book. Yeah, Stephanie Burgess just like continues to disappoint me. Like, it wasn't bad. This wasn't my least favorite thing I've read by her, but like I really enjoyed the first book, and so I was hopeful for the second one. And I did kind of like Silke as a main character, but there were just a lot of other things about the story that I think were like underutilized or frustrating when they didn't need to be. Like, there are a couple of like big sort of relationship switches that happen, and I really think we could have had more development on that, because it was such a big deal for it to happen so abruptly, and I didn't think there was any reason for us to wait that long for it to happen. I did like the political intrigue and sort of that setup, but I feel like that political element, I personally feel like it wasn't very nuanced. Like the things that Silke ends up finding out, I don't know. It made like some of the antagonistic characters just very flat in my opinion. And not that you can't have like antagonists who are like that, but I just think it would have been a really interesting choice for this book to do something different. And like I just think there were so many opportunities that central plot element could have been a lot more compelling if it had more like nuance or development. But yeah, I did overall like enjoy most of the characters. There's some side characters I really liked. Yeah, just this was very middle of the road. I gave The Girl with the Dragon Heart 3 stars. Oh, also another thing. So I really like some of the supporting characters, like I said, but one of the things that I feel like was underutilized in a way is some of the most interesting side characters. Like, I find the, like, eldest princess incredibly fascinating. I would love for her to be the main character of one of these books, but she's not. And we actually don't get to see much of her, and, I don't know. I guess, like, this is just another example of, like, Stephanie Burgess and I just have very different ideas of, like, what makes interesting stories, so that's okay, it happens sometimes. Next, I finished The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, and I can't actually remember the name of the author. I will put it in captions, but this is a modern classic, I feel like, at this point, and technically this was a reread. I remember reading this like several times when I was very, very young, and remembered almost nothing about it, but I have since read essays from other people talking about how much they enjoy the story, or kind of like analyzing it, because it's very, very short, but it is sort of like deceptively, I think, thoughtful in a way that I really enjoyed. So the setup is we are following this like one kid who, like, I don't even remember, because like the story is like kind of about the main character, but really it's not. It's about this other family. I'm pretty sure it was a young girl, but I honestly don't remember. So it's about like this town and their like experience with this family called the Herdmans. And they are this rowdy group of kids who are just absolute monsters. Like, honestly, it sounds so unpleasant to just exist in the same city with them. They're awful. Like, they're like nasty. They like bully other kids. They do like really dangerous, like not just like being mean, although that would be bad enough. It's like dangerous things. And just like horrible. Like every bad thing that you can picture like a horrible misbehaving child doing, they do it. So they're the worst. Nobody likes them, and they end up taking over the Christmas pageant for their town, or for this one church in their town, like the nativity play, and everybody is horrified because they cannot imagine like these kids playing like Mary and Joseph and like all of this. And so everybody is convinced this is going to be an absolute disaster. But maybe it isn't. I don't really know how else to describe it. This is one of those stories that's like about like the true meaning of Christmas, and it ends up being a really interesting perspective on the story of the nativity, of the Christmas story. It's just a really interesting lens, because these kids like have not, like, they don't go to church. They've never like really been told the Christmas story, and so they're essentially hearing it for the first time. And I think that is a really, really interesting way to like look at the Christmas season, and I just found this like genuinely really thoughtful and poignant. It's also hilarious. Like, there's a lot of humor in this. Like, the narration style, like this kid is just like so like dry. I love their sense of humor, and just like the way, like the way that the author can just like paint a picture of all this like madness and shenanigans and tell it in the funniest way, I just think is very impressive. But even though there is all of that humor, I think there is this core of like genuine sweetness. And this is the book I was talking about, where it's like, sometimes I like cheesy, because I definitely see how like people would read this and they're like, this is, you know, too cheesy, this is over the top, it's like saccharine. But I think for one thing, I think the humor kind of cuts that enough that it doesn't feel like annoying to read. But also I just feel like the way that these like emotional moments, or these poignant moments, were handled was so genuine that also didn't make it feel like overly cheesy to me. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm really glad that I've reread it as an adult. I do plan to kind of keep this in my Christmas rotation. I definitely see why it's a classic. I will say that there are some things that have not aged as well. Like, I remember there is a ton of just really unnecessary fatphobia at the beginning when they're talking about this other kid. So that kind of thing, just keep that in mind. But in general, I thought this was really well done, and I give the best Christmas pageant ever 4 stars. And then finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is another Christmassy one, and that is Charlotte and the Nutcracker, The True Story of a Girl Who Made Ballet History by Charlotte Nebray, illustrations by Aaliyah Marley. Let me show you some of those illustrations. I thought this was stunning, and I find it a little weird that this has a relatively low average rating for picture books. Like, in my experience on Goodreads, I feel like picture books tend to have not very many ratings, but unless they're like really, really bad, they tend to have pretty good ratings. Like, I think people only read and rate picture books if they know that they enjoy them. Do you know what I mean? And for whatever reason, this has a fairly low average rating, which I strongly disagree with, because I thought this was like beautiful. I really loved the art. I loved the story and the ideas and the messages, or I shouldn't even say ideas, because like it's a true story. It's about a young girl who became the first black ballerina to play Clara in the Nutcracker for, I think it was, is it the New York City Ballet? It was like one of the really, really elite New York City Ballet production of George Balanchine's The Nutcracker. And I just thought this was incredibly beautiful and inspiring and heartfelt. I think the writing also really stands out, which I think is always impressive for picture books, because I think the illustrations can often take center stage. But the like writing itself was also very like clever and engaging. I just thought this was beautiful. Absolutely recommend it. And I gave Charlotte and the Nutcracker 5 stars. Okay, everybody, so that was the first group of books I read in December. Let me know if you have read any of these, what you thought, or if you're interested in picking any of them up. I had definitely like a few misses, a few kind of like meh books, but I also had some really big hits. So it feels like pretty balanced out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!